does this latest data tell us about the health and strength of the Chinese economy?
So it doesn't tell us a great deal more than we already know, in the sense that we've known for a few months that the main driver, the main bright spot within the economy is exports and the manufacturing sector in particular, and what that means for the trade surplus. And so that story is definitely continuing. And as you can also see in the data, the import side is weak. Now, the import side is probably overestimating in the extent of what that tells us about domestic demand, because one of the other things that's happening in the economy is a shift away from spending on goods towards spending on services, particularly by the consumer. And so some of that overestimates just how weak domestic demand is. But clearly what the overall economy picture is one which is much more about muddle through rather than strong growth. And an important component of that muddle through is exports being strong, whereas domestic property market is much weaker. Now, obviously, this story of muddle through has been going on for a few months now already.
Indeed. So if muddle through is the strategy moving forward, what do we need to hear from policymakers at the upcoming third plenum to give us some insight into exactly how they're going to manage this moving forward? And are additional policy measures needed to firm up confidence in the economy and drive growth, something that the Chinese have been lacking for some time now?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so what we've got so far is three things that are going well for China. So one is the export side is quite strong. The second thing, I think at least, that the consumer has responded really reasonably well over the course of the last 18 months or so. There has been a recovery in consumption. It's not showing up in retail sales because it's much more focused in services. And the third thing is that monetary policy has actually been working reasonably well, in the sense at least that when we look, although everyone's worried about deflation and so on, actually, there's no sign in Japan so far of the sort of monetary squeeze that Japan had back in the 1990s, which involved both real rates rising and the currency strengthening a lot. Now, obviously, that's not what's happening in China. The problem is there's a big event that's happening in the future. That's not just the plenum, it's also the US election that's coming up. And I think that's really likely to change the external environment for China quite a lot, both because of the threat of additional tariffs that come from a possible Trump administration. But the second thing is the broader talk within Washington of the need for a weaker US dollar rather than a stronger US dollar. So one of the things we've had so far is this weakening of the CNY, a gradual weakening of the CNY, which is helping the export sector and helping the muddle through of the domestic economy. But looking at what the US is planning, or at least some of this election talk, it looks much more likely that that's going to be more difficult to sustain, which therefore brings us back to the plenum in the short term. And this is obviously a big platform for the government to make a change, to talk more broadly about where the economy is going, and to try to address some of these issues within the economy that clearly are keeping things weak. And one of those, obviously, is the property market. And I think this is a very important opportunity and a very important event for the markets, because I think the important thing for the domestic economy is that inflation needs to rise. Inflation right now is still too low. It hasn't been a major problem so far in the extent the economy has been managing to muddle through. But if there's going to be a lot more pressure on the currency over the course of the next 6 months, because of events that happen in the US, this muddle through is going to become much more difficult to sustain. And in that, I think it's very important that inflation therefore starts to rise, that nominal interest rates in China can therefore go up, and that provides a lot more stability around the currency going forward. So I think in that context, the plenum is very important for the markets and could mean a big change in direction over the course of the next 6 months.